Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into something that's been on my mind a lot lately, and I think it might resonate with you too. We're going to explore how releasing false expectations can lead to genuine freedom in our lives. Before we begin, I want to ask you to stay with me through this entire journey. I know we all have busy lives, and it's tempting to skip ahead or click away. But what I'm about to share might just change your perspective in ways you never imagined. So grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's explore this together. Have you ever noticed how much of our suffering comes not from what's happening to us, but from what we expected to happen instead? We build elaborate stories in our minds about how things should unfold. And when reality doesn't match those expectations, we feel disappointed, frustrated, or even betrayed. I remember a time when I was absolutely certain a project would succeed. I had everything planned perfectly, at least in my mind. I expected praise, recognition, and maybe even a promotion. But when things didn't go as planned, I was devastated. Not because the outcome was actually terrible, it wasn't, but because it didn't match the future I had constructed in my imagination. This brings me to the wisdom of the ancient Stoics, philosophers who understood human nature with remarkable clarity despite living nearly 2,000 years ago. The Roman philosopher Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Think about that for a moment. How much of your suffering comes from what's actually happening versus what you imagined would happen? The Stoics recognized that expectations are really just opinions about the future, and opinions, by their very nature, can be flawed. They're based on limited information, personal biases, and assumptions that may not hold true. The Stoic emperor, Marcus Aurelius, put it this way: "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." This isn't about pessimism or lowering your standards. It's about seeing reality clearly and working with it rather than against it. When we release false expectations, we don't resign ourselves to mediocrity. We free ourselves to engage with what's actually happening. So what exactly are these false expectations that keep us trapped? Let's explore a few of them. First, there's the expectation of control. We often believe we have much more control over outcomes than we actually do. We think if we just try hard enough, plan carefully enough, or want something badly enough, we'll get the result we desire. But the Stoic philosopher Epictetus reminds us some things are within our power while others are not. Accepting this distinction is crucial to our peace of mind. Epictetus was born a slave and suffered a permanent disability when his leg was broken by his master. Yet he found freedom in recognizing what he could and couldn't control. "Make the best use of what is in your power," he advised, "and take the rest as it happens." Then there's the expectation of permanence. We tend to believe things that bring us joy will last forever, and things that cause us pain will never end. Both assumptions are false. Good fortune and bad fortune alike are temporary. Again, Marcus Aurelius offers wisdom. Time is a sort of river of passing events, and strong is its current. No sooner is a thing brought to sight than it is swept by, and another takes its place, and this too will be swept away. When we expect things to remain as they are, whether good or bad, we set ourselves up for disappointment. Change is the only constant. Accepting this truth doesn't make us passive. It makes us adaptable, resilient, and better prepared for whatever comes next. A third false expectation is that of perfection. We expect ourselves, others, and the world around us to be flawless. We want the perfect job, the perfect relationship, the perfect body, the perfect life. But perfection doesn't exist in reality. It's a concept, an ideal that can guide us but never be fully realized. Seneca understood this well when he wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality." Our pursuit of perfection keeps us perpetually dissatisfied, always looking for flaws and never appreciating what's in front of us. I want to share a personal story that illustrates how releasing false expectations changed my life. A few years ago, I was set on a particular career path that I believed would bring me fulfillment and success. I had specific milestones in mind: a certain position by a certain age, a specific salary, recognition in my field. I worked tirelessly toward these goals, but life had other plans. An unexpected opportunity arose in a completely different field. It didn't match my expectations or plans, and my first instinct was to reject it. It wasn't what I had imagined for myself. It didn't fit the narrative I had constructed. After much reflection, I decided to let go of my preconceived notions and explore this new path with an open mind. I released my expectations about how my career should unfold and embraced what was actually unfolding before me. That decision changed everything. The new path led to experiences, relationships, and growth I never could have anticipated. Had I clung to my expectations, I would have missed out on so much. As Seneca wisely noted, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." Now, I'm not suggesting we abandon all expectations or aspirations. Goals and visions for the future can be powerful motivators. But there's a crucial difference between holding a goal lightly, being committed but not attached to it, and gripping it so tightly that we become blind to other possibilities. The Stoics teach us to aim high, but to find satisfaction in the effort rather than the outcome. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." This perspective shifts our focus from results beyond our control to actions within our control. Let's take a moment to consider how false expectations manifest in our daily lives. Think about your relationships. How often do you expect others to behave according to your standards, to understand exactly what you need without you having to express it, to prioritize the same things you prioritize? These expectations are usually unspoken and often unrealistic. When others inevitably fail to meet them, we feel hurt or angry. But as Marcus Aurelius reminds us, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, "The people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil." That might sound harsh, but there's profound wisdom here. The emperor wasn't suggesting we view others with contempt, but rather that we recognize the humanity in everyone, including their flaws and limitations. When we expect people to be imperfect, we're rarely disappointed, and we can respond with compassion rather than frustration. The same principle applies to our expectations of ourselves. Many of us are our own harshest critics. We expect unwavering discipline, constant productivity, and linear progress. When we have a bad day, make a mistake, or fail to live up to our own standards, we berate ourselves mercilessly. But Seneca offers a gentler perspective. "I am not perfect, nor do I claim to be, so I do not expect perfection from myself." Self-compassion isn't self-indulgence. It's a recognition of our shared humanity. It allows us to learn from our mistakes rather than being defined by them. As we approach the midpoint of our discussion, I want to emphasize that releasing false expectations isn't about lowering our standards or becoming passive in the face of life's challenges. It's about seeing reality clearly and engaging with it effectively. The Stoics practiced what they called negative visualization, deliberately contemplating worst-case scenarios, not to indulge in pessimism, but to prepare themselves mentally and emotionally for life's inevitable challenges. Seneca advised his students to set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself, "While is this the condition that I feared?" By intentionally experiencing discomfort, the Stoics inoculated themselves against the fear of losing what they valued. This practice helps us distinguish between genuine needs and mere preferences, between what's truly important and what's merely convenient. We can adopt a similar approach by regularly questioning our expectations. When you find yourself feeling frustrated or disappointed, ask yourself, what expectation am I holding that reality isn't meeting? Is this expectation realistic? Is it necessary for my well-being, or could I be equally content without it? Often, we discover that our expectations are arbitrary, products of social conditioning, comparison with others, or outdated beliefs about what we should want or have. Once we recognize this, we can begin to release these expectations and replace them with more flexible, realistic ones. Let me share another personal experience that illustrates this point. For years, I expected that happiness would arrive once I achieved certain milestones, a particular job title, a specific income level, recognition from others. I was constantly living in the future, always thinking, I'll be happy when... But as I studied Stoic philosophy more deeply, I began to question this expectation. Was happiness really waiting for me in some future achievement, or was it available right now, if only I could adjust my perspective? Epictetus had insight into this very question. He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has. I started practicing gratitude for what was already present in my life, rather than focusing on what was absent. This shift in perspective, from expecting happiness in future achievements to finding contentment in present circumstances, was transformative. It didn't diminish my ambition or motivation. If anything, it enhanced them. I was no longer working toward goals out of a sense of lack or insufficiency, but from a place of abundance and genuine passion. This brings us to another important aspect of false expectations, our relationship with time. Many of us expect that we'll have plenty of time in the future to pursue what matters most to us. We postpone joy, connection, and meaningful work, believing there will always be a better moment to begin. But Seneca warns against this delusion. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Life is long enough, and a sufficiently generous amount has been given to us for the highest achievements if it were all well invested. Each moment we spend captive to false expectations is a moment we could be living fully. Each day we postpone authentic living while waiting for conditions to be perfect is a day lost forever. So how do we begin this process of releasing false expectations? It starts with awareness. Notice when you're feeling frustrated, disappointed, or anxious. These emotions often signal that an expectation isn't being met. Instead of immediately reacting, pause and identify the expectation behind your feelings. Next, examine this expectation. Where did it come from? Is it yours? Or did you absorb it from family, society, or media? Is it realistic? Is it necessary for your well-being? Then, consciously choose whether to maintain, modify, or release this expectation. This isn't about lowering your standards. It's about ensuring your expectations align with reality and with your authentic values, rather than with external pressures or arbitrary ideals. Finally, redirect your focus to what's within your control, your judgments, your choices, your actions. As Marcus Aurelius advised, concentrate every minute on doing what's in front of you with precise and genuine seriousness, tenderly, willingly, with justice. Let's consider some specific areas where false expectations often cause suffering and how we might approach them differently. In our careers, many of us expect linear progression, constant growth, and recognition proportionate to our efforts. But careers rarely unfold so neatly. There are setbacks, sideways moves, unexpected opportunities, and periods of stagnation. Rather than expecting a particular career trajectory, We might focus on developing valuable skills, creating meaningful work, and maintaining integrity in our professional relationships. As Epictetus suggested, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. In relationships, we often expect others to meet our needs without us having to express them clearly. We expect consistency, mind reading, and perfect understanding. But humans are complex and ever-changing, including ourselves. Instead of expecting others to conform to our ideals, we might focus on honest communication, mutual respect, and accepting the humanity in both ourselves and others. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, when you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. With our bodies and health, many of us expect perpetual youth, boundless energy, and freedom from illness or limitation. But aging, fatigue, and illness are natural aspects of being human. Rather than expecting perfect health or a particular appearance, we might focus on treating our bodies with care and respect, whatever their condition. Epictetus, who lived with physical disability, wrote, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." In our spiritual or personal development, we often expect continuous growth, profound insights, and freedom from negative emotions. But growth is rarely linear, insights can't be forced, and emotions, positive and negative, are part of the human experience. Instead of expecting constant enlightenment, we might focus on regular practice, patient observation, and self-compassion. When we struggle, as Seneca advised, we learn not for school, but for life. I want to emphasize that releasing false expectations doesn't mean abandoning all standards or becoming passive. The Stoics were anything but passive. They were senators, emperors, teachers, and activists. They engaged fully with life while recognizing the limits of their control. Similarly, we can hold high standards for ourselves while accepting that we won't always meet them. We can work diligently toward goals while remaining open to unexpected outcomes. We can value relationships while accepting others' autonomy and imperfection. This balanced approach is captured beautifully by Epictetus. Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. It's about focusing our energy where it can have the greatest impact, our own choices, judgments, and actions, while releasing attachment to specific outcomes. When we do this consistently, we begin to experience a profound sense of freedom. We're no longer hostage to particular results. We're no longer devastated when reality doesn't match our mental images. We're no longer postponing happiness until conditions are perfect. Instead, we're fully engaged with life as it is, not as we think it should be. We're responsive rather than reactive, flexible rather than rigid, resilient rather than brittle. This freedom doesn't mean we never experience disappointment, frustration, or grief. These emotions are natural responses to life's challenges. But when we're not adding unnecessary suffering through false expectations, we can move through difficult emotions more gracefully and recover more quickly. I've noticed in my own life that the more I release false expectations, the more space opens up for genuine appreciation and joy. When I'm not constantly comparing reality to my mental images of how things should be, I can see more clearly what's actually in front of me, and often it's pretty amazing. This approach also creates more room for genuine connection with others. When we're not expecting people to fulfill specific roles in our personal narratives, we can see them more clearly and appreciate them for who they actually are, not who we want them to be. As we begin to wind down our exploration of expectations and freedom, I want to share a few practical exercises that have helped me apply these Stoic principles in my daily life. These aren't quick fixes. They're practices that, when applied consistently over time, can profoundly shift your relationship with expectations and increase your sense of freedom. The first practice is morning reflection. Many Stoics began their day by contemplating potential challenges and preparing themselves mentally. Seneca described this practice: "I will keep constant watch over myself and, most usefully, will put each day up for review." You might try something similar. Each morning, take a few minutes to consider what expectations you're holding for the day ahead. Notice any attachments to specific outcomes. Remind yourself of what's within your control and what isn't. Set intentions for how you'll respond to challenges, knowing that not everything will go as planned. The second practice is evening review. At the end of each day, reflect on moments when you felt frustrated, disappointed, or anxious. Were these feelings linked to unmet expectations? Were those expectations realistic and necessary? How might you approach similar situations differently in the future? Marcus Aurelius engaged in this practice regularly, writing in his journal, which later became Meditations. Do not disturb yourself by picturing your life as a whole. Meet then each immediate challenge properly and without flinching. A third practice is voluntary discomfort. The Stoics deliberately exposed themselves to minor hardships, cold showers, fasting, uncomfortable clothing, to remind themselves that discomfort is manageable and that many of our needs are actually preferences. You might create your own versions of this practice. Skip a meal occasionally. Turn off the air conditioning on a hot day. Walk instead of drive when feasible. These small challenges help us distinguish between genuine needs and mere expectations of comfort. Fourth, practice negative visualization. Regularly contemplate losing things you value, not to induce anxiety, but to increase appreciation and reduce attachment. As Epictetus advised, remember that you must behave as at a banquet. Is something brought around to you? Put out your hand and take a moderate portion. Does it pass by you? Do not stop it. Is it not yet come? Do not stretch your desire toward it, but wait till it reaches you. Imagine losing your job, your home, your health, or a relationship. How would you cope? What would remain valuable in your life? This practice isn't about expecting the worst. It's about recognizing your resilience and reducing fear of loss. Fifth, question your shoulds. When you catch yourself thinking, this should be different or they should have done that, pause and examine this belief. Is it based on universal truth or on personal preference? Could reasonable people disagree? What happens if you release this should and accept what is? Epictetus put it bluntly: it is not events that disturb people, it is their judgments concerning them. Our shoulds are judgments that often cause more suffering than the events themselves. Finally, practice gratitude for what is rather than longing for what isn't. Each day, notice what's going well, what you're enjoying, what's supporting you. As Epictetus said, he is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has. These practices aren't about denying reality or suppressing emotions. They're about seeing clearly, responding wisely, and finding freedom in the space between external events and our internal reactions. The journey of releasing false expectations isn't linear or finite. It's a continual process of noticing, questioning, and choosing. There will be days when you slip back into old patterns, when you find yourself attached to specific outcomes or frustrated because reality doesn't match your mental image. When this happens, treat yourself with the same compassion you would offer a friend. As Seneca reminded us, we are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality. Notice that you become entangled in expectations again, and gently return to what's real, what's present, what's within. your control. Over time, this practice becomes more natural. You'll find yourself less frequently caught in the gap between expectation and reality, more able to engage directly with what's happening rather than with your stories about what should be happening. This doesn't mean you'll never feel disappointed or frustrated. These emotions are natural responses to certain situations, but when your disappointment isn't amplified by rigid expectations, it passes more quickly and doesn't define your experience. I want to share one final personal story that illustrates the freedom that comes from releasing false expectations. A few years ago, I had planned a special trip, one I'd been looking forward to for months. I had vivid images in my mind of how everything would unfold, the experiences I'd have, the feelings these experiences would evoke. Then, just days before departure, circumstances beyond my control forced me to cancel. My initial reaction was intense disappointment, even anger. All those expectations, all that anticipation suddenly rendered meaningless. But as I sat with these feelings, I recognized them as signs of attachment to a particular outcome. I was suffering not because of the cancellation itself, but because of the gap between what I had expected and what was actually happening. I remembered Marcus Aurelius's words, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart." I made a conscious choice to accept this change of plans and look for opportunities in it rather than dwelling on what had been lost. To my surprise, that weekend, which I had expected to spend in disappointment, turned out to be deeply meaningful in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Because I wasn't fixated on what should have been happening, I was able to be fully present with what was actually happening. And it was beautiful in its own right. Not better or worse than my original plans, just different. That experience taught me that our most carefully constructed expectations are just stories. Reality will always be more complex, more nuanced, and often more interesting than anything we can imagine in advance. This isn't to say we shouldn't make plans or hold visions for the future. Planning is valuable, vision is powerful, but they serve us best when we hold them lightly, when we're willing to adapt, when we recognize them as provisional maps rather than fixed destinies. As we conclude our exploration of freedom and expectations, I want to leave you with a few reflective questions to consider in the days ahead. What expectations are you currently holding that might be causing unnecessary suffering? Where did these expectations come from? Do they align with your authentic values, or have they been absorbed from external sources? What would it feel like to release these expectations? Not to abandon your values or goals, but to hold them more lightly. To focus on what you can control, your choices, your actions, your responses, rather than on specific outcomes. What freedom might be available to you right now if you were to accept reality as it is, rather than as you think it should be? Not in resignation, but in clear-sighted engagement with what's actually happening. Seneca reminds us, the greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today. The whole future lies in uncertainty. Live immediately. When we release our grip on how things should be, we free ourselves to engage fully with how things are. This engagement, this direct, unmediated relationship with reality, is where true freedom lies. Not in getting everything we want, but in wanting what we have, not in controlling external events, but in mastering our own responses, not in life conforming to our expectations, but in our ability to adapt to life's ever-changing nature. So, I invite you to experiment with releasing false expectations. Notice when you're attaching to specific outcomes. Question your shoulds. Focus on what's within your control. Practice gratitude for what is, rather than longing for what isn't. The freedom you seek isn't waiting in some future achievement or acquisition. It's available now in this moment through your relationship with reality. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." Thank you for staying with me throughout this exploration. I hope these ideas offer you the same freedom they've given me. If you found value in this video, please share it with someone who might benefit, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Until next time, remember the wisdom of Epictetus. Freedom is not achieved by satisfying desire, but by eliminating it. May you find freedom in releasing false expectations and embracing life as it is.